virtual class. Let's start with our topic for today. Today we will be learning about sequence connectors, and I'm sure it's a familiar word for many of you. But despite it being quite familiar, I still feel like a lot of people don't really understand the power of sequence connectors and how actually to use them best. So, sequence connectors. First, let's take a look at what are sequence connectors. Basically, sequence connectors are transition words in other aspects. Transition words are words that we simply use to link ideas together. For example, when you're writing an essay and you have, let's say, 4, 5, 6 different points, you want to make sure that your essay is able to flow in a smooth, cohesive pattern. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to use transition words. To put it simply, sequence connectors are like the bread and butter of writing. They are one of the very basic elements of proper writing, and it's definitely something that you shouldn't miss out on when you write. Think of it as a glue between ideas. So when you have all these different ideas that you want to put in your essay, you would need something to help make it stick or to make it more cohesive, and that's why we use sequence connectors. So we do have a little bit of rules when it comes to using sequence connectors, and obviously rule number 1 is to not overuse them. I would say that if you have 6 points, then you should use about 4 to 5 sequence connectors. Don't use each paragraph has one sequence connector or something like that, because it tends to sound a bit too repetitive if you overuse them. Secondly, you can use them to start a paragraph, that is okay, but to get the best impact out of a sequence connector, you should either use it in the beginning of a paragraph, not a sentence in the middle, or you could use it in the middle portion of the essay that you're doing. For example, let's say you have an introduction and then you have your first point. To flow cohesively into your second point, you would then throw in a sequence connector in there, and that would be the best way to use it. Try to avoid using it right at the end, because sequence connectors are used to connect ideas, and towards the end you kind of want to go into the conclusion part already. So using a sequence connector there is not very advisable. You can put a dot, a semicolon, or a comma before the sequence connector and the idea that you're trying to connect. For example, let's say you use in addition, you would have in addition, comma, and then you would put your point following that. Alright? So there are so many different types of sequence connectors, about 6 to 7, and I will be going through around 6 of them. And these 6 are the ones that we use on a very common basis for any type of essay. Regardless whether it is narrative writing or formal letter, you would need a sequence connector for any sort of writing, provided that you have points that you're trying to link. The first one is an opinion essay. So when you are trying to form an opinion or you're trying to state your stand, these are some of the sequence connectors that you can use. For example, I think, or I feel, or you could say in my opinion or in my view. So all these, the keywords here are opinion or in my view or I feel. So you're cementing that this is your stand. You're saying that this is my take. This is what I'm trying to imply, and your essays would sound really good if you were to put a sequence connector right before you put in the point there. Second is the sequence part. It's a bit confusing when I say sequence connector and sequence, but when I say sequence, I mean those essays where you're following a certain step. For example, if you're teaching them how to make a certain recipe, so you would say step 1, step 2, step 3. You could say step 1, step 2 and all that, but it would sound way too repetitive. So instead, you can say stuff like firstly, secondly, thirdly. But if you are using firstly, secondly, try not to go above 4, because it would sound really weird if you're saying firstly, secondly, thirdly, fourthly, fifthly. Try to mix it up here and there. So maybe if you say firstly, secondly, then you can say next. Or you could say finally if you're coming to the last point. Or eventually, which also has the same meaning as next. Another sequence connector is when you want to talk about addition, or when you're trying to say this is my first point and now I'm trying to add on another point to that. So you could say in addition, which is the one that all of us know. Those that are really common are stuff like in addition, furthermore. I would say try to steer away from it, because everyone uses it and you want to make sure that your essay has something different to it. So maybe you could try as well as or also. Try to go for something that is against the grain, something that not many people would go for, to make sure that your essay sort of stands out in the eyes of the marker. Okay? And then we have emphasis. When you want to say this is the point that I want to highlight on the most, you can say stuff like especially. So let's say you have point 1, point 2, point 3, but then you want to place the most emphasis on your last point. So you would say above all, this point is the most important, so on and so forth. Or you could say indeed all these other points are important, but my point 4, the point part you have to fill in your EC. Okay, so you can use stuff like more importantly and so on. And then we have contrast, sequence connectors that show contrast. This might come in useful when you're doing an argumentative essay where you have to talk about not only your stand but also the opposing person's stand or the opposite part of the argument. So you could say however or nevertheless, despite this. So basically you have to put your point, and then when you want to throw in the point that disagrees with what you are trying to say, you would use the sequence connector that shows contrast. Like for example, on the contrary or alternatively. So these are some useful words that you guys could definitely throw into your essay to make it so much better. And then we have the conclusion. Now I know that everybody goes for the usual in conclusion or in a nutshell, but I think we can do a lot better honestly. Why don't you guys try something like finally or on the whole or to sum up? This is a very good way to show the marker or the person who's reading your essay that okay, this is the end of my essay, this is the conclusion, and this is maybe your final point, or maybe you're summarizing all your points. So if you put something like to sum up, it would help the reader know that they have already reached the last part of your essay. Alright, so that is all for me for sequence connectors. I hope that you guys have benefited a little bit, and I really hope that you guys can use this in your writing as well.